Emma and her girlfriend Sarah had finally found their dream home. Together with their rescued cat Luna, everything seemed perfect when they first moved in. But perfection wouldn't last long. The property to their right appeared deserted. The owner had begun renovations but abandoned the project halfway through. Between their home and this neglected house, there was a peculiar setup: an entrance to their back garden, then right beside it, an entrance to the abandoned property's back garden. The owner had removed the fence to install a new one but never completed it, leaving both yards completely exposed to each other. Behind the abandoned house stood another property, separated by a fence. Several young men lived there, and Emma and Sarah occasionally noticed them cutting through the vacant neighbor's yard to reach the street. At first, they assumed the men had permission from the owner. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. Alright, let's dive back in. But their first night in the new house revealed something was very wrong. Sitting in their back garden that evening, enjoying their new space, they glanced up at the houses behind them out of curiosity. A man stood at a window, staring down at them with a completely blank expression. He wasn't trying to hide it, he made it obvious. The room behind him was dark, making the whole scene even more disturbing. They told themselves he was just curious about new neighbors. But after half an hour of that emotionless stare, they retreated inside. The following days passed normally. Emma went to work while Sarah continued unpacking. One evening, they decided to sit in the garden again. It was dark, but they loved stargazing and having deep conversations. Then they heard the makeshift wooden fence being moved. 3 men appeared, standing there, staring at them in silence. "Are you okay?" Emma asked, knowing they wouldn't leave unless someone spoke. The youngest one, around 29, held a large bag. They had no idea what was inside. He offered them stolen dishwashing tablets. They declined. Emma made an awkward joke to break the tension. He smiled, said, "Okay," and they left. What struck them most was how these men simply entered their garden without announcement, as if they had every right to be there. Emma and Sarah went back inside, hoping it was a one-time incident. It wasn't. The men began letting themselves into the garden more frequently, their behavior clearly designed to intimidate. They accessed the abandoned house by lifting the fence, separating the back gardens, and walking through. Emma and Sarah, both just 20 years old, couldn't shake the feeling that as 2 young women, they were being deliberately targeted. One day while Emma cleaned the front room, 2 police officers came around the side of their house and entered the abandoned garden. They lifted the fence, looked around for several minutes, then left without explanation. Emma found it strange but continued her day, assuming the neighbors were in some kind of trouble. A few days later, the police knocked on their door with news. They explained that the house behind theirs was now vacant. The men had been evicted for antisocial behavior, not just toward Emma and Sarah, but toward other neighbors as well. Honestly, they felt relieved. Even though the men hadn't physically harmed them yet, at least now they wouldn't get the chance to escalate. They continued settling into the house. But one day while Emma was in the bath, she heard a loud bang outside. She quickly dressed and ran to find Sarah, who was recording something from their spare bedroom window overlooking the now empty house's garden. "What's going on?" Emma asked. Sarah shushed her. After a moment, she explained, a man they'd never seen before had pointed up at their bedroom window. When Sarah noticed him, he sprinted full speed toward their house, tried their door handle as he passed, then ran back into the garden, threw up the broken fence, and started banging on all the windows of the empty house. They called the police immediately. Officers came, watched the video, took a statement, and left. But the question haunted them: why try their door? What was he planning? A few nights later, while they lay in bed, they heard whistling, the kind men use to harass women. It was 2:16 a.m. They listened quietly, then heard someone tapping on their window. Terrified, they checked the cameras, but for some reason, nothing recorded. Whoever it was must have left shortly after because the noises stopped. They were too scared to sleep, so the next day they went to Emma's mother's house and stayed the night. When they returned the following morning, they discovered their Ring doorbell had been removed and placed on the floor. The SD card was gone. Someone had clearly returned. And they knew who. They called the police again. The woman on the phone told them to keep all doors and windows locked, adding that the camera removal could indicate someone was planning something. At least she was honest. The whistling, banging, and break-in attempts continued for weeks. They filed multiple police reports. The men never tried their door again, so they hoped the worst was over. But 3 weeks later, while in bed watching funny clips from their camera, they checked the live feed. What they saw made their blood run cold. A man stood outside wearing a black mask covering his mouth and nose, hood up, standing in front of their garden with his arms spread wide, like he was imitating Jesus on the cross. He stared up at their bedroom window with his head tilted. They froze. At the time, they'd moved the camera inside the house, so it didn't record. They were so shaken they didn't even think to screen record. He spoke, but they couldn't hear what he said. Then he turned around, walked to the opposite side of the street, and just stood there staring at their house for about 30 minutes. They called the police again. Officers said it wasn't illegal to stare at someone's property and dismissed the whole thing. Even when Emma and Sarah described what he'd done on their lawn, the police made them feel like they were overreacting. They couldn't sleep for days. Any noise outside terrified them, even normal ones. Then one night at 2:52 a.m., they got a notification. Emma woke Sarah. "Someone's outside." "I know it. Please check the camera." Sarah did. There they were, 2 masked men coming from the side of their house, shining flashlights into their windows. One of them, the same man who'd been harassing them, held what looked like a crowbar. Why them? What was the point of this? For days on end he stood across the street, pointing, waving, or shouting things up at their window. Every time they looked, he stared blankly at them. It was clearly meant to scare them, and it worked. They kept contacting the police, but officers did very little. The harassment continues. They have cameras now and record everything, but they feel powerless. Just earlier today he stood outside again, staring up at them. They captured it on video. They're absolutely terrified. Let me say this up front. I'm not crazy. I know how this sounds, paranoid, unhinged, delusional, but I swear everything I'm about to tell you actually happened. It started with faces. Or more accurately, faces that all looked just slightly off. 3 months ago, I ended a relationship with my ex, Marcus. We'd been together almost 2 years, and the breakup was long overdue. Marcus wasn't violent, he never hit me, but he was controlling and possessive in that calculating, low-key way. Perhaps the worst kind of way. He'd track when I was on my phone and quiz me about my day to see if I'd give the same answer twice. After I left him, I changed my number, disabled my social media, and even moved apartments. I thought I was in the clear. Then came the barista. It was a Tuesday morning. I stopped by a small coffee shop near my new place. I'd only been there once or twice. As I stepped up to the counter, the barista, a girl about my age, smiled at me. But something about her expression made me pause. She tilted her head and said, "Good morning, sunshine." I froze. That was Marcus's nickname for me. Not a common one. He used to say it sarcastically whenever I was upset. "What's wrong, sunshine?" He enjoyed pushing buttons. I brushed it off. Maybe it was a coincidence. But then it happened again. A few days later, I took a rideshare to work. A different driver than usual, an older guy, maybe in his 50s. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror like he was trying to recognize me. Then he asked if I ever figured out what I was running from. Casual as could be. "What?" I responded. He just chuckled and shook his head like I was in on some joke. Marcus said that to me once, after I told him I needed time to figure myself out. He leaned in, dead serious, and asked, "Ever figure out what you're running from?" Now 2 strangers had repeated things he said, word for word. It kept happening. A woman at the grocery store bumped into me and whispered, "You don't get to just disappear." A guy on the street said, "Still wearing your hair like that," as he passed. Another one, someone who worked in my building, said, "You always like this song," while humming the exact tune Marcus used to play when we argued. It wasn't their faces that freaked me out. It was the way they looked at me, like they knew me, or at least thought they did. They all had different faces, but their eyes held the same expression. I started thinking I was going crazy. I mean, what else could explain it? So I did something I wasn't proud of. I contacted Marcus, not directly. I sent a message to his sister. I told her to tell him to stop. I figured maybe he'd hired a private investigator, was stalking me, or pulling strings, telling people things about me. I just wanted it to stop. She texted back the next day, "I don't know what you're talking about. Marcus is in rehab. He's been there for 6 weeks with no phone." I didn't believe her. I thought she was covering for him. Until I saw a picture she posted on Facebook a week later, Marcus looking pale and sunken, holding one of those one-day sober chips. So it couldn't be Marcus. At least not directly. But I couldn't shake the feeling that these strangers knew things they shouldn't. One night, I stayed late at work. I didn't want to go home. My apartment didn't feel safe anymore. Not that anything bad had happened inside it. I just didn't like being alone. Around 10 p.m., I finally called it a night. I walked the 10 minutes to my place, keeping my head down, headphones in but no music playing. Something I learned to do so I could still hear if someone was following me. When I turned the corner onto my block, I saw someone sitting on the stoop of the building across from mine. A young man with his hoodie up, head down. I almost ignored him. Until he spoke. "Cold out tonight, huh, sunshine?" I stopped walking. He didn't look at me. He just stared at the sidewalk like he was reading something on it. I slowly walked past without saying a word. When I reached my building, I went upstairs and locked every bolt on the door. I sat on the couch for hours, just listening to nothing. Eventually, I fell asleep. The next morning, I woke to find my doormat flipped over. That might not sound like a big deal, but I live alone, and my door is on the top floor. You don't just accidentally walk by my place. The underside of the mat had something scribbled in pen. "You can change your face too if you want, but I'll still recognize you." I didn't know what it meant. But I threw up. That day, I booked a hotel for the weekend. I left my apartment without packing anything. I didn't feel safe even grabbing clothes. I just needed to be somewhere crowded. The hotel clerk gave me a room on the 4th floor. Small, quiet, kind of stuffy, but it felt safe. Until around 2 a.m., when someone knocked on my door. 3 slow knocks. I sat up in bed and waited. They knocked again. Eventually, I peeked through the peephole. A woman, maybe in her 40s, stood there. Her face was completely blank and expressionless. She just stared straight at the door. She didn't say anything. I didn't make a sound. Eventually, she left. It was one of the most disturbing things I'd ever seen. The next morning, I asked the front desk if someone had come by my room. They said no one should have been up there, especially that late. All the rooms on my floor were vacant. That's when it clicked. These weren't random people. They were being sent, fed my details, given phrases Marcus used. But if it wasn't Marcus, who would do it? And what? I thought about Marcus in rehab, about his obsession with control, making sure I was never fully gone. He didn't need to be the one knocking. He just needed to send others to do it. I started digging. There was one conversation I remembered from months before the breakup. Marcus talking about a forum he was on, a place where people shared tactics. He made it sound like it was for productivity or self-improvement. I don't remember the name. Honestly, I don't think he ever gave me the name. But in retrospect, it sounded like some creepy cultish roleplay crap. Except it was happening to me for real. Someone, probably Marcus, had hired people to say his words and mimic his patterns. Even if he was out of my life technically, I'd still be constantly reminded of him. It wasn't stalking in the traditional sense. It was psychological graffiti. Like he was spraying himself onto strangers so I could never be sure who I was looking at. I don't think it's about watching me. It's about making sure I never stop watching for him. I moved again. Disappeared off social media again. Even dyed my hair. I told friends not to tell anyone where I was. It worked. Until last week. I was walking home from the bookstore when a woman passed me on the street and said, "Still hiding behind books, sunshine." She didn't stop walking. Didn't even look at me. I don't think this will ever stop. Maybe he paid some underground service to do this to me for a year. Who knows? Maybe he made it public. Maybe this is some sick underground game now. Who can scare Sunshine the best? Who can get the closest without touching? I can't trust anyone's face anymore. The constant paranoia is eating away at my mental health. My family doesn't travel. We're homebodies, so everyone was surprised when my aunt proposed a trip to one of Michigan's Great Lakes. We agreed, wanting to create new memories together. My cousin booked a spacious Airbnb that could somehow accommodate all 18 of us, a miracle considering the price. The house sat right on the beach with gorgeous lake views stretching for miles, almost like an ocean. Most of us claimed rooms in the main house, but because of our large group, some were placed in a second building directly behind it, a 2-story garage with bedrooms upstairs. My 3 cousins and I were assigned to sleep there. At first, we didn't think much of it. We spent most of the first day enjoying the hot tub, relaxing on the beach, soaking in the scenery. It wasn't until night that we really entered the garage. The space was outdated and neglected, carpeted bathrooms that smelled like mold, stained bed linens, a poorly secured latch on the door. Clearly, the cleaners focused on the main home and ignored the garage. My cousins were grossed out and refused to sleep on the beds unless we washed the sheets. I suggested we do laundry. The machines were small, so we could only do one set at a time. It was obvious we'd be up late. We passed time upstairs, waiting for the first load. My cousin Diana complained about how we got stuck with the worst place. As she spoke, I started to feel uneasy, like something bad was coming. I've had this feeling before, a rare kind of intuition that usually ends in a nightmare or something worse. I told my cousins to stay alert. They listened, especially since we'd all experienced a break-in before when we lived in Detroit. Around midnight, the bell rang from the first floor, signaling the wash was done. I went downstairs alone, swapped the load into the dryer, and brought up the clean-smelling sheets. When my cousins saw how clean they were, they wanted their bedding washed too. So I kept going up and down between cycles, doing everyone's sheets. At around 2:37 a.m., we were finally done. We made the beds, too tired to stay up any longer. My cousin Jessica insisted we leave the light on. While they all fell asleep quickly, I stayed up doing schoolwork on my phone. I'm a light sleeper, something that stuck with me since the break-in. I remained hyper-aware of my surroundings, even while half asleep. Then, around 3 a.m., a loud bang hit the garage door. Like someone had thrown their body against it. I sat up, startled, but my cousins didn't move. I tried telling myself it was just wind, though the noise was too heavy for that. Still, I stayed quiet and tried to sleep. But then it happened again. Same deafening crash. This time shaking the garage door. The building trembled from the impact. I was fully awake now, watching the lamplit room as my cousins continued sleeping. No animal or gust of wind could cause that. 20 minutes later, the third boom hit. The garage shook again. Finally, 2 of my cousins bolted upright. "Did you hear that?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Jessica asked what it was. I said, "I don't know, but this is the 3rd time I'm hearing it." We all agreed no wind could cause that sound. Jessica suggested texting her mom, my aunt. We did. It was 4:11 a.m. when she responded, realizing something serious must be going on. She woke my uncle, who ran outside to check the property. We stayed upstairs, too afraid to move, until we heard knocking. It was my uncle at the door. When we opened it, we saw him standing there with my dad and a few of our older male cousins. That's when I knew it was serious. There was no wind. No one playing around, my uncle said. Then he added the words that made my heart sink. "There's someone on the property." He told us to grab our things. We were going to the main house. I threw everything into my suitcase. We all rushed out of the garage. Once inside the main house, most of the family woke from the noise and commotion. We sat in the living room, trying to piece it all together. I told them about the first 2 loud crashes. My cousins confirmed the third. My aunt explained what happened when my uncle went out to investigate. She followed him. He shouted, "Hey," at someone standing behind the garage. The door to the main house slammed behind her right then, and there was no wind to explain it. She feared someone might have slipped inside, so she ran to wake my dad and cousins. After searching, no one else was found inside. Then my uncle described what he saw. A man stood behind the garage, not hiding or moving but staring, like he wanted to be seen. When my uncle called out, the man didn't flinch. He simply walked away and vanished. Not into the darkness, into thin air. The leaves on the ground didn't crunch. There were no footsteps left behind. My uncle's not someone who makes up stories. He's a serious, logical man. Which made everything scarier. My brothers added that they'd found 2 Joker cards. One in the main house, one in the garage. The one in the garage was twisted and demonic looking. One cousin pointed out that Jokers symbolize mockery. And the loud sounds happened around 3 a.m., the so-called devil's hour. It was as if we were being taunted. My uncle had checked for footprints but saw only his and my cousin's, not the man's. Another cousin had driven down the road during the incident trying to spot someone fleeing but found no one. That day, no one returned to the garage. We squeezed into the main house, on floors, couches, anywhere there was room. My mom gave up her bed so we could sleep more comfortably. On the second night, she slept on a couch by the large windows. She woke around 4 a.m. to footsteps on the porch. She didn't dare open her eyes, afraid of seeing someone looking in. Then she heard someone trying the basement door. It had a weak lock. My brothers and male cousins were sleeping down there. The door rattled as someone tried to break in. My mom rushed to the basement, but by the time she reached the beachside entrance, no one was there. All the boys were still fast asleep. That was our last night. Though we'd planned to stay until Tuesday, we left Monday instead. On the way home, we couldn't stop talking about what happened. When my mom found out I'd been going downstairs alone during laundry, she theorized that someone might have been watching me, thinking I was alone in the garage. The timing lined up way too well, my last trip downstairs and us going to sleep, right before the banging sound started. Theories formed. Some thought it was a neighbor trying to scare us off. Others believed there was something paranormal, especially because of the Joker cards. My aunt pointed out that a normal person would have run when my uncle spotted them. But this man didn't run. He just watched. And disappeared. We contacted the Airbnb host, who claimed she'd review the footage from the camera above the garage door. We never heard back. It made us wonder, did she know the man? Was he a neighbor? When we first arrived, my sister and cousin had walked the beach and passed a woman next door. She watched them coldly, no friendliness or greeting, just an unfriendly gaze. The house was in the middle of nowhere. We understood how constant Airbnb guests might annoy locals, but we were respectful. We didn't deserve what happened. This was our first family trip. Hopefully not our last, even after everything we went through. If this story moved you, hit subscribe with notifications on. And tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from?